Ace Lightning is a really poorly received game based off of a children's show that few people watched, but I personally feel that it had a bad rap. It has some issues with polish, and the controls can be sluggish, but the level design itself stands out. The first thing you will notice is that the textures are very interesting. There's no real lighting, so all the shading is baked into the textures, and the colours are seemingly all over the place. However, the shapes are very strong, so you always know what you're looking at, and the gaudy colours in the first level give the game a bad first impression. But do bear in mind that the opening levels, which have the worst aspects when it comes to the textures being a mess, are based on a circus big top. And then in a later level you're in a funhouse at the end of World 2, so gaudy colours are to be expected there. And later in the game the colours do calm down and make a lot more sense for the environments, and generally the later areas for the castles and western areas just look much better than the earlier areas do because they're not trying to be as colourful. Graphically, my favourite thing with this game though is the motion comic style cutscenes, which are a lot of fun and are the most visually striking part of the presentation, and they're done pretty well. Structurally, the level design is pretty strong. There is a lot of alternation between vertical levels and more horizontal levels, and many rooms combine the two, and there is variety in the ideas, from a hedge maze to the rigging along the top of a big top, to a bar fight in a western saloon. Also, while some levels have some backtracking, it's not frequent. Only the hedge maze and the funhouse really require any, and other levels, if they require you to go back to an earlier point, will give you a shortcut. The other levels tend to be quite linear, as they are pure platforming challenges. However, it does have a problem in its difficulty curve. The second world has a really wonky difficulty, as the hedge maze can be confusing to some, and is full of tough enemies, and both it and the funhouse are incredibly long, while also being tough. Also, the second boss is one of the hardest in the game, which honestly feels like a video game tradition at this point. Either the second boss in a game or the second to last boss in any game is frequently the hardest fight in a lot of games. The former because you haven't got all the skills yet and you haven't quite learned how everything works, and the latter because the actual final fight in many games has more phases to it, so it's less of a skill ceiling and more of a test of stamina, so each phase is a little bit less hard than each phase of the second to last boss's thing. An example would be how Riku fights in Kingdom Hearts are frequently harder than the Ansem fights, because Riku only has a couple of phases, up to 4 really, throughout the entire game, while Ansem you often have to fight in a bunch of different phases all at once. Or Xemnas, or whichever final boss you're talking about. From the third world, things settle down and become a lot more reasonable. This presents a major obstacle though, as an early difficulty spike can discourage players from trying, especially if they're already finding the game subpar, and it can make the game feel unfair because you haven't developed the skills yet to counter what it's throwing at you. The illusions levels should either have been third, instead of second, or they should have expanded the well and trimmed the hedge maze and remodeled the funhouse to form a more reasonable curve, due to the well being so much shorter than the other two levels. The biggest major problem with the game is that the controls are really awkward. The attack combo is stiff and barely reaches an inch in front of the player, and the other attack is a weird sliding dash that always moves at the exact same distance because it doesn't take into account the player's momentum. Jumping though is consistent enough to be usable and not have any major issues. You just need to get used to the arc, although the camera being as stiff as it is makes it hard to work out what's above and below you. I do like the overall structure of the game itself though, as during your journey through the varying levels you collect pieces of a central object that you get to watch slowly build over the course of the game, and I find that kind of progression really satisfying. The enemies also have a lot of variety, like the weird lawnmowers and the hedge maze. Although only being able to carry up to 9 lives is a bit annoying, because it means those pickups are meaningless if you're already at the maximum lives. So playing well only doesn't really matter so much because you can't really get stockpile lives. The game overall has a really strong identity that elevates it above other bad to average PS2 games, as a lot of them, like Stealth Force War and Terror, have no real identity and feel really generic. Before my LP years ago, I'd only heard of it as the worst PS2 game, so it was a pleasant surprise at the time, as generally if I hear people being that extreme about a game, I'm often just kind of like in the mindset of, yeah, let me be the judge of that. So thank you for watching. Goodbye. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and check out my Patreon as well. Speaking of, thank you to James Rossi for supporting me on Patreon.